I'm Gab, he's Jules. Blue skies over West London. It was a little chilly, but my voice has returned.
Yes, finally.
Jules, what a show we have, because
Yes.
we'll be doing our Gab and Jules draft later on. We're both huge NFL fans, and of
Yeah.
course, today is the NFL draft, first round.
Exactly.
Bring up the players drafted in 2004. But anyway, that's for later.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of other stuff going on. Manchester City winning at Burnley. It's all square at the top of the Premier League. The only thing separating them is like it's a wafer thin sliver of the fact that City have scored more goals this season. Also, we have in La Liga, Lamine Yamal concern over his injury as Barcelona win. Real Madrid also win. Inter through to the Coppa Italia final with a comeback. But let's start at Brighton. On Tuesday night, Brighton beat Chelsea 3-0.
Yeah.
For kind of the first 12 hours, it looks fine. Rosenior very angry after the game. I mean, really angry. And then Wednesday night, we discover Rosenior has left Chelsea. Callum McFarlane, the under-21s coach, we've seen this guy before, is now in charge.
Yeah, I think it was inevitable, really. I think the defeat at Brighton was embarrassing. It was a disgrace of a performance overall for the team from Rosenior himself, because his lineup again and his tactics, his game plan didn't make any sense from the beginning. He had to change at halftime again. How many times have we seen this before? Because he kept getting it wrong and wrong and wrong. And I think there's a limit to what you can accept as a football club. I think the fracture between Rosenior and his own dressing room, his own players, was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And considering Chelsea's position in the league right now, they could be down to 11 by the weekend, because they're not playing, obviously, because of the FA Cup weekend that they have. I think there was an emergency to get rid of him and try something different, because this was clearly not working.
Yeah. The interesting thing with Rosenior, and we'll get into this further, is Chelsea knew what they were getting with Rosenior. He was already working for Chelsea, right? He worked for Blueco, who owns Strasbourg. This is a terrible call in appointing him and then letting him go like this. And I realize it was the worst run since 1912. I'm not saying it was a mistake to let him go, but you have to be more holistic, because I have to really question your judgment, because this is not, we're taking a leap on a bright young manager who we don't know. No, you're taking a guy you do know, and then things get bumpy, and then you ditch him. And you could tell at the weekend when he started making some of those changes. Remember at the beginning, oh no, it has to be Caicedo and another midfielder plus Enzo. Now all of a sudden that goes out the window. It's just the two of them. Then we saw this wacky back three that they started with. Clearly, Rosenior over the last 2 weeks says, I need to change. And the whole thing unravels. And I think the real risk now for Chelsea, I don't want to go down the financial situation rabbit hole, but it is important. Chelsea were fined a ton of money for breaching financial stability rules. Yeah. They're under a settlement agreement, which means they have to hit tighter targets than they would have to otherwise. If they don't have that money coming in from the Champions League, they're going to be in a really difficult situation.
Yeah, they've been in big trouble. I disagree a bit with you. I think they knew this was a risk. I think they believed in him, and rightly so. I think he's a really good young coach. And I think they were hoping that he would be ready for the step up, really, from Strasbourg or even the Championship, let's say, to a club like Chelsea. And you could see why they went for him. I think
if you go for him, then you have to have a plan. You can't go for a coach.
Not working,
but I'm sorry,
it's not working, you give him a chance. If he doesn't take the chance,
okay. I'm sorry. He's a coach. His job is to coach the team, right?
Yeah.
If you bring in a guy, and look, I'm not the only one saying it. Enzo Fernandez said this, right? Cucurella said this. If you bring in a guy, I mean, me personally, I would have kept Maresca, but whatever.
Yeah.
But if you bring in a guy in these circumstances without preseason, at a time when you're in so many competitions that he's a coach, but he can't do his job, which is coaching, because you only have one practice a week, how do you expect a change?
I disagree. It's like he got Tudor. For me, Rosenior and Tudor.
There's another great appointment.
But exactly, but it doesn't matter. But it's exactly the same way. You believed in him. You thought he could do a good job there, like Tudor at Spurs, because Tudor did well at Juventus, because he did well at Strasbourg. And in the end, they were just not good enough. Some will be able to make the step up. Others don't. He wasn't. But you have to cut your losses as soon as possible, because you realize it's never going to work. So what? You would have kept him. It was not going to work now or next season.
No. You go back to the people who appointed him and you question their judgment, and
know.
you hold them to account for a bad decision. Because now what you've also done, and I agree with you. I mean, you've been very praiseworthy of Rosenior when he was appointed the job he did at Strasbourg. You've taken a guy who was in your organization and now you burned him, right?
Yeah.
You've burned him as far as Chelsea's concerned anyway, because he didn't get a chance to work. He might not have been good enough, but essentially you didn't find out. And now you're in the screwy situation on the table. And I'm glad that they're taking a pause to reflect on things. They have a lot of things to think about, and a lot of things also about their model to think about now. But we're going to break this down further on the Gab and Jules podcast. All right, Jules, before we go further into the Chelsea cluster mess, we have a word on Brighton, because I can remind people, Fabian Hürzeler is the youngest manager in the Premier League. He does, I think, unusual things sometimes. Some players who I think are really good maybe don't get as much playing time, don't get featured. Others that I think are less good do get featured, and then he gets results. And again, they're right up there for yet another season. And that is an example, I think, of a gold standard club in terms of how they're run. And you can tell it's the culture of the club, because all these smart people at Brighton, they all left, most of them for Chelsea.
Yeah.
And now they're making dumb decisions.
Yeah, I mean, the structure over there is really good and really efficient, to be fair. And at times this season, they had their struggles. I think Hurtler himself was a bit lost in exactly what he wanted to do. But now things are much better. I mean, this game, I think Chelsea would have lost against any other teams in the Premier League, including Wolves and Burnley.
Because of the vibe going in and the lineup.
Because how bad they were, the lineup, the players clearly had enough of Rosenior, didn't really play that game or anything like that, especially in the first half. But still, Brighton are right now very much in the race for a top 6 finish, for a 6th place finish, which could even take them into the Champions League next season, which would be incredible. But even if it's just another Europa League season, like with the Zerbi, if it's a Conference League, I think they would take it. It's very positive, and I just like a lot of what Özil does. Tactically, the inverted centre backs, things like that. I think it's cool. It's risky, and that's why at times they didn't really get the result, because it's a bit chaotic at times. But that's part of it, and I think right now it's working really well for them.
All right, I want to bring it back to Chelsea, since we'll talk about Hürzeler when he becomes the next guy they bring over from Brighton, because that worked so well before. If we rewind a little bit, and I think this is the reason this is relevant, and I think there's 2 points that we're here. One is the model, which we'll get to, but the other one is the decision making, because I think this is going to inform who the next coach is. Already, people obviously talking about Iraola, talking about Cesc, talking about Xabi Alonso. Funny enough, they're all Spanish. Spain, well done. You are the gold standard for coaching right now, I would say, right? If we rewind about why Maresca left and what we thought Rosenior was going to do different or better than Maresca in Chelsea's hopes.
Yeah.
What did you think that was?
I think it was developing the young players, especially, although Maresca did that. I think the problem with Maresca was not so much, what I think he was still very much the right guy for the project. It's just that he maybe wanted a different role within that structure than the one that he had been followed since he arrived, and rightly so. I don't think you can blame him for that.
When you say different role, you mean like more say over the lineup,
Exactly.
more say over transfers?
Yeah, all of that. Instead of just being there and basically being told what to do and who you can play, in a way, just to sum it up a bit,
right.
Like that way. And then I think he wanted something a bit like what De Zerbi, when he left Brighton, or where he fell out with the people at Brighton, he wanted a slightly different role too, and that was not suited for him. So I can see what Maresca were not. And for Rosenior, they used him because they took him on, one, because he was promising, and it was true. Everybody that was watching Strasbourg saw how promising he was as a coach, but also because they knew he would be the yes man. And that's what he was for the 4 months that he stayed at the club. It's just that being the yes man is one thing, being a good enough manager to do other good things than just saying yes to the people above you is something else, and that other party didn't have it.
So I completely agree on that front. I disagree slightly between, I think, Maresca and De Zerbi different. I mean, De Zerbi Maresca's already at a big club. Maresca knew what he was getting into. De Zerbi, I think, tried to elbow his way a little bit with Brighton and perhaps paid the price. De Zerbi also far more emotional man than
but he just wanted them to stop selling their best players every summer, and the club didn't want to. So.
But as far as Rosenior is concerned, you're saying he comes in and he's a yes man. Football-wise, did they expect, other than maybe shoving more Hato down our throats, who seemed to be an obsession of whoever signed Hato at this club. I'm not saying he's bad enough. I'm just saying that at center back, he's problematic, and at left back, you have Cucurella, but whatever. Football-wise, did he bring changes? Do we think, looking back, did they expect him to change the type of football, the brand of football that Chelsea were playing?
No, I think the idea was probably
continuity.
Yeah, I think so. He tried different things tactically at the beginning. Let's not forget, he started with 5 wins. In all competitions but
that was against Summer Cup wins, against the Muppet Show and whatever.
But still, and I remember I was covering his first game in charge away at Charlton, and I know it's only a championship club in the FA Cup that we showed on ESPN, and there were some really interesting things that he did tactically, like he did in Strasbourg. So I was like, okay, all good. But I also remember when he was appointed on the ESPN FC show, saying there would be something we'll have to give, because in France he was playing man marking everywhere on the pitch. It was literally so intense. And I said, you can do that in Ligue 1, no problem, with young players like they have at Strasbourg who are listening to you and you're kind of a hero for them. Go to Chelsea in that dressing room with those egos, with those superstars in the Premier League, and try to do you super intense, high pressing, man pressing, marking everywhere. This is not going to work. And from very early on, the things that worked for him in France, and again, it's a much weaker league than the Premier League, we're never going to work here. And the problem is, for too long, he kept the idea that he had in France and tried to bring them on here for Chelsea, and that was never going to work. He should have adapted far quicker and earlier than what he did. And I think by the end, like you said, Gabby, earlier, he tried to change. That was too late anyway.
I was also fascinated, and I touched on this before, in terms of the changes that. So with Maresca, essentially, it was Palmer went fit in the hole, and behind them, Enzo and Caicedo, and then that kind of then mutuated. Sometimes we would get Reece James in midfield or whatever. But then you had an issue because, of course, you had 2 wingers. If you're going to have Enzo in the hole, then either Palmer doesn't play or Palmer plays wide.
Yeah,
which we were told, we were given the impression this was part of the reason why Maresca wasn't there anymore. He wasn't comfortable with necessarily pushing the wingers, right? Now, then he came in, Rosenior comes in, and day one, look, here's my boy Andre Santos in midfield with Caicedo, or here's Lavia with Caicedo, and then we're going to put Enzo in the hole until Enzo says something stupid, and then I suspend him for 2 games. So it looked to me like this is another thing where I don't think there's joined up thinking here. Either Rosenior did this on his own, which I think was the right thing to do, but without the club's quote-unquote permission, or the club decided at some point, no, this is stupid. We need to have somebody alongside Caicedo and Enzo further forward. But then if that's the case, why not let Maresca do that? Did you see what I'm saying? And I think this is why, I was there, right? For the United home game. I heard fans singing like, Bali, get out of our club. We want our Chelsea back, all this stuff, right? And we can put all the blame on Bedare Bali. Fine. But you have Martin Samuel in the Times called them the 5 Stooges, but these 5 wise men.
Yeah.
What do they say? We never hear from them.
Yeah.
Well, surely they're the ones who give the general imprint. They recruit the players to the coaches, and it's on them. I want to hear from these people.
I think this project now of getting young players and developing them, and then probably selling some for more money than you bought them, etc., showed the limits. But this is not new. Right. Again, we knew from the beginning that there would be a point where this would happen. Like trying to do this kind of project is very, very difficult, I think. A club like Chelsea, for a club like Brighton, maybe Brentford, even a club like, I don't know, let's say Ajax, it's slightly different because it's a lot from within and the academy. But this is the idea of those young players. Can work. It can work in other leagues. Strasbourg, great. They might even win a European trophy this season for Blueco. So things like that can work. Not at Chelsea. Not in the Premier League. Chelsea are not that kind of club. I'm really sorry. From the beginning, it was very obvious that they would fail. And they failed. And now, what do? You're so much invested already in that project that it's hard to just, go back. So the best I think they can do is trying to get a better balance within experience and those youth talent. They've got some super talented youngsters.
So when you talked about the project, there's different aspects to it. And you talked about failure. First of all, they did win They are world champions.
Yeah, of course.
They did win the Conference League.
Exactly.
And I really want to know, with some different choices made over the summer, I think they could have very comfortably been top 4 and probably been third. I think. So, we talk about failure. I don't think it was 100% in terms of the development on the pitch side. When we talk about the project, the other aspect to it is, as we mentioned, and Ibali said this, he compared it to the NFL, where the first round, the picks are really valuable because for your first X amount of years, you can essentially pay them less money and put resources elsewhere, and then because they're on low salaries, they're easy to shift and so on, right? The difference between them and Brighton and Ajax is that because Chelsea have Strasbourg, Chelsea essentially control an enormous amount of players. They spent a ton of money on them.
Yeah.
They signed them up to very long contracts where they're actually making relatively small financial commitments to the players. These players are not on Chelsea-type wages. In exchange for that, they get all these years, and if they do well, they can renegotiate and then get a bump. And all those years at the end, we saw Caicedo 2033, Palmer. Those years may be there, may not be there.
Yeah,
as a player, I know
much.
they're coming. So they've kind of moved the needle there. And they say, and the idea behind this is, okay, if we need to raise money quickly, we can just shift these players, right? Because it's not difficult. It's the biggest thing for big clubs to do is to move a player when he's on huge wages, right? These guys, many of them, are not on enormous wages. Yeah. I think where they're going to run into a massive problem, they made enormous losses last year and the year before. This is despite a third of the Champions League money, Club World Cup money, which is not insignificant coming in. FIFA are not going to count the money that they made from selling the women's team to themselves. I don't know how you can raise money quickly. I mean, we're talking off air before. You did it with Madueke. In terms of saleable assets that somebody will give you significant money for, because I don't think there's that many players that Chelsea would want to move on. Yes, you can sacrifice Cole
Palmer. That's the difference. It's not about who you want to move on. It's who you will have to let go anyway.
So it's going to be lesser players, perhaps? Would somebody give you some money for Jamie Gittins?
And they might
or
try.
Nico Jackson?
But the one that you could go, that people would come is Nico, is Enzo, Caicedo. Okay. Obviously, you'd find a market for him. Cole Palmer, you'd find a market. Reece James, you'd find a market. So they still have some. Some of them they don't want to let go, and they probably don't want to leave the club, maybe. But that's what they would have to look into, not Gittins, because Gittins for 50 million, you bought him a year ago.
Yeah, so his amortization would have gone down to 40 million, and it's not going to help you.
Exactly.
The difficulty with this is, I think Enzo's amortization is in the 60 to 70 range, right? So even if you sell him for 100 million, which, by the way, I don't know who's going to give you 100 million for Enzo Fernandez, frankly. I mean, you're only making 30 million off him, right? That's only a small step, and you've let go a key player. Caicedo, could he be worth 150? We love him.
Yeah.
Okay, fine. But
Palmer is the one with the biggest value and profit you can make.
Because Palmer, they paid 40 million for because he's been there a while. You can really cash on big on Palmer.
Yeah.
If somebody were to give you a lot of money for Reece James, but then he's homegrown, he's your captain, and he's also does not have a good injury record. But this is the difficulty you're in. You can raise a good amount of money from Nico Jackson because he didn't cost very much because you exercise the release clause. But these other guys, these guys were kind of in between, like Malo Gusto, for example, right? I think he's a good player.
Yeah,
I think they paid 35 million for him.
Yeah, there'll be a market for him.
Okay, but a market at what number? Because once you get into who's going to give you 50 million for a right back, for example, right?
Yeah. But even at 40, even if you sell him for the price you paid for him,
with
because he's been there 2 seasons, you still be a small profit, but it will
15,
still be
20 million. But then you need to replace Malo Gusto.
Yeah,
right?
True.
And then you're dropping 50 million on kids.
But like I said earlier, Gab, something will have to give anyway, because you will need money because you won't make it to the Champions League. It looks very unlikely now. So you will need to bring in some money to balance your books. And for that, you can't keep your best players either. One will have to go probably.
And one of the other things that should be mentioned is because of the relationship with Strasbourg, the way UEFA treat transfers between clubs, no matter what the amount, they don't do this for market value. The amount is always zero, right? So the guys at Strasbourg would have to come to Chelsea, and then Chelsea would have to sell them for a profit or transfer them for a profit, which they can only do in a year's time.
Yeah.
So that's going to mess things up. I think the main question they're going to have to do is, can we afford to abandon the project at this stage? Because abandoning this kind of project is going to come at a big, big cost.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's harder to pivot than waiting, right? Let me
Maybe
wait.
just tweak it. Maybe don't abandon it, but just tweak it.
Yeah. And again, sometimes tweaking things is worse than either abandoning or sticking with it.
But you know, also
these are big decisions.
Yeah. And just to go back on Rosenior, what I think was really unfair to him on the pitch, I think we all agree. I think that the job was too big for him. He was not really ready or not completely ready. He made mistakes. Tactically, I think in his own communication as well, some of the lines that he came up with, even on his first press conference at the club when he said, I'm not arrogant, but I'm very good at what I do, as in being a coach. I think there was stuff that he would look back and think, okay, maybe I should not have said that. Maybe I could have said that differently. However, for all the people who attacked him personally on the way he looked or the way he talked or the way he presented, I think that's disgraceful, because he's still a young coach who was really promising in France. And whether we thought from the beginning it was a mistake or not, a gamble or not, it doesn't matter so much. But at times it felt like people were after him not for the right reason, which were, okay, is he good tactically? Does he does a good job on the pitch with the players, etc., etc.? And that was unfair.
Yeah, but Jules, I think the reality is, I don't want to say, well, I'll probably get in trouble for this, but I don't care. The reality is, in this media market in England, with the commentariat of ex-players, if you are different, and he is different, he's different because he hasn't won anything, and yet he's at a big club, right? Which makes him different from what people expect. He's different because I think they'll put up with coaches who are different and stuff if they're successful. Look at Arsene Wenger. Here's a guy that was educated and spoke in complete sentences, and he wore glasses, but he was treated like he was some sort of freaking joke because he wasn't until he won something, right?
Yeah.
This guy was not a great player, right? Not an elite player, right? He speaks in complete sentences. He dresses differently. He wears glasses. He's a person of color, which I don't think helps him in the eyes of certain people. I mean, it shouldn't be like this, but it is.
Yeah, that's what I said.
So you're stacking all these things against you. He would have probably had an easier time if he was foreign. He was just some weirdo, right? Hertzler manages it because Hertzler looks psychotic, even though he was never a great player and he was Mr. Nobody and whatever, and he's at Brighton. I think it's ridiculous that optics should still matter in this way. And I don't know how he should have acted. I don't know if he should have gone out there and burped and just dropped the G's at the end of his words, like another former Chelsea manager who we both know very well does, to appear more working class. But this is the reality of the situation.
Yeah, I'm just saying it's unfair. I know it's the reality, but that was really unfair. And even after his sacking, I think some of the people justifying the sacking the way they did was really unfair.